Hello and welcome. I am Ian. I am one of the organisers, and I also work in advocacy and awareness raising when I'm not doing this. This morning, I'm going to kick things off as I always do with a news update. So, a look at some of the highlights of the great progress made over the past 6 months since our last event. There's a lot to cover, so it will be coming at you pretty quick. But don't feel like you need to keep notes or look things up, because at the end, I'm going to give you a URL to a document. That document will have links in it to everything that I'm going to talk about today. I have 5 topics for you: platform and hardware, player resources, developer resources, games, and people. So starting at the start, platforms and hardware. The headline grabber here has been about PlayStation's Access controller. It isn't quite with us yet, but the launch date of the 6th of December and the price of $90 per controller were announced, and pre-orders are now open. But something that is with us now is a complementary console feature for the PlayStation 5 that allows 2 controllers to be paired as one. So a second player can assist, or a single player's controls can be split across 2 devices, like between a regular controller and an Access controller. So this works in much the same way as Copilot on the Xbox and Tandem that used to be on Stadia. This launched alongside another really nice operating system feature too. This was UI haptics to reinforce navigation of system menus for blind players. This added haptic effects for things like focus shifting, reaching scroll limits, or checked and unchecked states of UI elements. There have been some nice things elsewhere too, including a couple of new features in iOS 17. This is the first, Assistive Access, which is the option to switch the system UI and some apps to an alternative mode that drastically simplifies both the motor and the cognitive load. There have been people calling for this on consoles for many, many years now, so I hope this can act as a template and give some principles for others to follow. Apple also upgraded support for accessibility switches. They've long been leaders in this area with the ability to map switches to all manner of touch interactions and gestures in games, but they've now added the ability to map switches directly to gamepad inputs. So games that support game controllers on iOS can be controlled directly by accessibility switches, and it's exactly the same way as something like the Xbox Adaptive Controller, the PlayStation Access Controller, or the Hori Flex. And last, but by no means least, Google launched Project GameFace. This is an AI-driven tool to create an accessible gaming mouse through mapping facial expressions to mouse interactions. It's open source and still in active development, so they are keen to have input from players and developers alike. Next, we have some nice developments in resources and information, starting with resources for players. First up, we've seen a leap in accessibility coverage in mainstream review sites. It's finally starting to become a thing that reviews, other than dedicated accessibility reviews, are also starting to cover it. Like in this example from Eurogamer, where all reviews now have a dedicated panel listing some highlights in basically bullet form of what kind of accessibility functionality they've seen in the game. This is something similar in TechRadar, but rather than the pull-out panel with a list, it's more editorialized. So it's a paragraph of prose as a regular subsection of the review. And this is a slightly different approach being taken on VG 24/7. This is an image gallery showing the default control schemes and what the subtitles and the UI text size look like. This is something that takes absolutely no accessibility expertise to produce, but is still extremely useful information for players to be able to make informed purchase decisions. And on a similar note, the Family Gaming Database have now developed an API giving access to the accessibility information in their database. This API is already on use on a number of review sites, including Push Square, Nintendo Life, and Pure Xbox. A player resource that is specific to Xbox is their Ambassador program. Their Ambassador program is a worldwide network of players who help to foster the community and make it a safe and enjoyable space. As part of that, they have an Accessibility Explorer Path, which is a gamified program for ambassadors to learn about the topic and take it on into their work. It is divided across missions, which are specific learning activities. And back in May, Xbox announced that they've now hit a milestone of 1 million missions taken by 18,000 ambassadors. Xbox have been up to a whole bunch of other player supporting things too, such as updated accessibility support pages, bringing their tag filtering and searching from console over to the Xbox Store website and also the Xbox PC app, and also producing a new video user guide for the Xbox Adaptive Controller. And Xbox, together with Ubisoft, have been continuing to drive accessibility at showcase events, both accessibility of the events themselves, like Ubisoft Forward and the Xbox booth at Gamescom, but also within the content itself, with accessibility having a segment in Xbox's extended summer showcase. But as awesome as these are, it really cannot just be the domain of a select few companies. With some planning and organisation, this is not difficult stuff to do, so please speak to these companies who are leading in this area. Speak to people like Brandon Zahand and David Tisserand. They will be more than happy to chat with you about how to do the same for your own company's online or physical events. Another highlight of the Not E3 season was the Accessibility Summer Showcase from Laura Kate Dale. This was a show that was solely about accessibility, showcasing 15 recently released and upcoming games that have been making an effort to put accessibility at the forefront of their design. It was a really wonderful celebration, and of course accessible itself with ASL, BSL, and audio description. So if you have a game that is hitting around or after next summertime that you'd like to get in front of the community, please hit up Laura. And one last thing to come from the summer festivities was accessibility information about Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown. In these news updates, I used to quite often talk about progress in games sharing information ahead of launch. I don't do that anymore, as quite wonderfully, it is now such common practice that it is no longer newsworthy. So if it's no longer newsworthy, then why am I talking about Prince of Persia doing it? Well, because not only was it shared 7 months before launch, it was actually shared alongside the announcement of the game itself. It literally could not be announced any earlier, meaning that fans across the full spectrum were able to get in on the hype at the same time as everyone else, treated as equals. There has only been, to my knowledge, one other game that has ever done this before, which happened earlier this year, and that was Magical Delicacy, published through the always awesome Whitethorn Games. They also showcased their accessibility in the materials for the announcement of their game. These games have been able to share this information because they were working on accessibility from the start and had swathes of it in place from a very early stage. but it doesn't have to be all or nothing. Even if you can't share on day one, the earlier you can share, the better. And it doesn't have to be complete. Just look at God of War Ragnarok. They did a partial reveal 6 months before launch of everything they were certain of at that time, then followed up with a complete list closer to launch, which actually gave them another marketing beat. And the reception to that from the community was fantastic. So this has been a little bit of a ramble, I know, but it's important. The inability to make informed purchase decisions is still a huge issue, and comms are a critical part of building a good relationship with the community that you want to reach. And you're going to hear more about that from Jessica Roach tomorrow afternoon. So next, on to developer resources. This has been an interesting area in the past 6 months with developments across a really broad range of things. First is a tool, Tolk, for Game Maker Studio. Some of you may already be familiar with Tolk. It is an abstraction library that does some of the heavy lifting of passing info about your UI out to various screen readers, so it can then be passed by blind players. In tools like this and ReadSpeaker, and also progress on native engine solutions too, the technical barriers to blind accessible UI development are steadily falling, which is wonderful to see. So a very different kind of resource next. This is a collation of papers, articles, guidelines, and so on neurodiversity in the industry. It's put together by the fantastic Harriet Frayling of Manycat Studios over in the UK. And again, I'll be giving you that document with links to all of these at the end. Again, in the UK, from Rebellion this time, this is something that I've personally never seen before in the industry. They hired an accessibility consultant, who was Antonio Martinez, who you might know from Game Accessibility Nexus. They hired him to do an audit on Sniper Elite 5. That in itself, hiring a consultant to do an audit is nothing new. But for Global Accessibility Awareness Day, they shared it online in full, freely available. It's a really great watch, not just for learning about what kind of barriers and solutions are applicable to a game like this, but also, if you haven't done it before, for insight into into what working with a consultant is like, and what benefits and engagement like that can actually bring to your own work. And they also shared usage data on Sniper Elite 5's features. And these two in particular stood out. 95% of game sessions were played with subtitles turned on. We've seen this exact figure again and again across genres when subtitles are on by default, which of course they must be, because even when they're off by default, most players still turn them on. Also, 34% of game sessions were played with an increased text size. So 95-34, these are not insubstantial figures. You cannot afford to do a bad job of subtitles in their presentation. You cannot afford to do a bad job of text size. They're two of the most common accessibility complaints. They really, really need to be a top priority from the very start of development. And shifting south a bit now from the UK to Spain, the disability organisation Fundación ONCE collaborated with AEVI, which is the Spanish games industry body, to publish a 90-page white paper on game accessibility for the local industry, covering both guidelines and also an overview of accessibility hardware. There's also from Spain some wide-ranging research with blind and low vision gamers that came out of the Universitat Autónoma de Barcelona. 81% of blind and low vision gamers have been locked out of a game due to inaccessibility. 90% wanted audio description in games, and 95% of people who used audio description in other media wanted to see it in games. So if you're not familiar, audio description is a narration track, a person describing what is happening visually on the screen. It's common in other industries. It's now starting to rapidly spread in games, starting to move from trailers over into gameplay too. So that's following on from The Last of Us to now appear in games like Stories of Blossom, Forza Motorsport, and Mortal Kombat 1. And there is a talk about it this afternoon. And next, something which to me is really momentous. Player Research, and in turn its parent company Keywords, have launched Advancing Accessibility, drawing from companies across the Keywords portfolio to build a collection of new capabilities to help developers go further with accessibility. It's a really extensive set of services covering workshops and training, consultant hookups, QA, audio description production, design, even co-development of features and tools. This wealth of capabilities as a service is not something that's been available in the industry before, and it's going to be a huge asset. And it's a big deal for me personally because of the landmark that it represents. For a company like Keywords, who plays a part in such a substantial swathe of the industry's work, to want to do something like that says something not just about them, but about demand, about the step we're now reaching in the industry's journey towards accessibility maturity. It's in very safe hands, being led by Emilienne Chiasson, former accessibility lead for IDOS. She'll be sharing some of the research that went into the founding of the service in her talk tomorrow morning. And of course, everything that I've mentioned so far is in support of one thing: accessibility of games. Every time I do one of these talks, there's another leap forwards, and this time is no exception. I'm mostly just going to give you names of games, but there will be links to details of what each one of them did in that document that I'm going to give you at the end. It has been a tremendous time for AAAs. Even right now, the image up here is Forza Motorsport, which is launching during this conference. And somehow, in the middle of launching the game, they've managed to fit in producing a talk. So you'll be hearing more about the wonderful things they've been doing tomorrow. And I'll actually come back to it again in a minute too. But of course, it hasn't just been the Forza show. Other AAAs making great strides over the 6 months have included Jedi Survivor, Redfall, Diablo 4, Street Fighter 6, F1 23, Mortal Kombat 1, The Crew Motorfest, and Assassin's Creed Mirage. And indies, as always, have been knocking it out of the park too. Just a few to check out include Sky Tales, Stray Gods, Mail Time, Moving Out 2, Disney Illusion Island, Warhammer 40,000 Bolt Gun, Polyfury, 30XX, A Night in the Attic, Above Snakes, Firebird, and On Guard. And one especially, Stories of Blossom. If there is only one single thing you take from this whole talk, it's to go and play this game. It's a spectacular showcase of just about every area of accessibility. There is so much that other teams could learn from it, and learn from any of the other games that I've mentioned too. There have also been a ton of games upping their accessibility game post-launch through updates. Games like Gotham Knights, Hogwarts, Granblue Fantasy Versus, Age of Empires 4, Stray, World of Warcraft, Ixion, League of Legends, even Quake 2 26 years after it launched. And of course, as always, Sea of Thieves. This update is a bit special though. It's part of a bigger picture. And this is a screenshot of the new aim assist audio setting that arrived with Season 9. And it's for first-person shooter style shooting. So if you're doing that as a sighted person, you're using information on the proximity of an enemy to your crosshairs to calculate how to adjust your aim to bring them under the crosshairs so you can shoot them. And this setting translates that into audio cues. So it generates a clicking sound that adjusts based on that proximity, in turn making first-person shooting accessible to blind players. So I mentioned a bigger picture, and I also said I'd mention Forza again. So that bigger picture is accessibility of mainstream games to blind players. Past 6 months, we've had blind accessible FPS mechanics in Sea of Thieves, blind accessible racing in Forza, blind accessible point-and-click adventure with Stories of Blossom, blind accessible fighting mechanics in both Mortal Kombat 1 and Street Fighter 6. The tide is finally turning. This has a couple of implications. Firstly, not being able to picture how blind accessibility works is becoming less possible because of these great examples spanning genres. But also, we're at kind of a sweet spot at the moment. Teams are still really making their first steps, so there's still huge opportunity for innovative approaches that can drive the whole industry forwards. And that, together with now having all these examples to work from, and also many more examples from the audio games sector, should mean very exciting times ahead. And just one last thing to mention on games, which is representation. There have been some great disabled people being represented within games, like Fortnite's ASL emote, Moving Out 2's Avatar wheelchairs, F123's tinnitus representation, and Galaxy of Heroes introducing a character with limb difference. Last two, F1 and Galaxy of Heroes, have something in common, and it's something that they have in common with the medical wearables in The Sims and Wraith's ASL use in Apex Legends, both of which came about early this year. What they all have in common is being driven by Morgan Baker, Game Accessibility Lead at EA. She is doing really spectacular work in this area, and she's here today as well. So Morgan, if you are hit up by people wanting to chat representation in the breaks, you know who to blame. Which brings me neatly onto people, the people who drive all of this change. I'm sure everyone here has some either direct or indirect experience of just how tough a time it has been for the industry recently. But even against that backdrop, the growth of accessibility as a dedicated professional discipline has continued. Which means I have some new full-timers to welcome to the field. Kiyomi Katayama, UI UX Accessibility Designer at Santa Monica. Drew McCrory, Lead Accessibility Designer at Blizzard. Joseph Kulik, Accessibility Program Manager at Splash Damage. And Britt Dye, Chief Accessibility Officer at Whitethorn, which I believe is the first time that job title has existed in the industry. And two more. Accessibility Quality Designer at EA and Accessibility Researcher at PlayStation. They have big question marks over their faces because they're vacancies that are currently open. And I know of at least two more roles that are going to be advertised over the coming months too. If you are interested in any of those, or indeed any others that come up in the future, check out the job openings channel on the SIG Discord. It's a really fantastic resource. So on that nice note, I am going to wrap it up. All of this adds up to a pretty cool 6 months for me, and I hope you're feeling that too. Great progress across so many areas, some of which you are going to hear more about today and tomorrow. They are all wins for all of us, and I hope that they keep your fire burning. Last of all, finally, that document that I keep promising. It has links to everything that I mentioned in this talk, plus a bunch of other nice things too that didn't quite make the cut. And you can find that at tinyurl.com/GACONFOCT23. So tinyurl.com/GACONFOCT23. Thank you for watching, and I hope the next 2 days treat you well. I'll see you on the Discord.